I'm going to tackle a subject I've been avoiding for the last 2 years on today's Unnamed Real Estate Podcast. Hi there. Right now I'm not sure if I'm stalling or if I'm actually stalling. So, how you guys doing? My name is Charles Ray Dawson. I'm the Associate Broker and Residential Sales Manager of ProStar Realty. This is the Unnamed Real Estate Podcast, episode 145. Hold on for a second. Like literally got ready to start hitting record, and I started doing that coughing thing I do all the time. So, but hey, how you guys all doing? It's we're well into November now, and we're getting ready for Thanksgiving and everything around here. And real estate is, well, the market's frozen up. We've been talking about that for a while. We got some numbers for you about that. We're still suffering from the results of that lawsuit that happened in Missouri, and people are still struggling to figure out what they're going to do with all that. And earlier this week, found out there's another lawsuit, brand new one. These copycat lawsuits we're waiting to have come in. This one's actually out of Illinois, and instead of going for the listing brokers this time, they're going for the buyer's brokers. That's right. The person who found them the house, helped them negotiate to purchase that house, helped them, get their inspections done, made sure they did not buy a money pit. Yeah, apparently they found 7 people in Illinois, of all places, who decided that they would not have had to pay as much for that house if their real estate agent wasn't charging. So that's... it's so much fun watching my fellow real estate agents every time they hear about one of these lawsuits. Just go, no, that's not right. Well, it doesn't have anything to do about right or wrong. It has to do with what you can prove in court, boys and girls, all right? The argument here is that houses that these buyers paid for had inflated prices because their agents were involved in purchasing that house. And those agents were in collusion with the seller's agents to drive up commissions, and those commissions were tacked on top of the sales price. And the transaction was then made. So the buyer wouldn't have had to pay that extra money if there weren't real estate agents involved. Hey, you know what? You could have gone and knocked on every door of every FSBO you ever saw. And you also could have gone straight over to the new builds and bought one of those by yourself. They'd be happy to have you come in. But I don't want to talk about that. All right? During the course of talking this over with other agents and whatnot, and coming up, doing the big grand strategy meetings with the boss, it really came down to that subject that I have talked about discussing on this show since like the first episode. All right. And the fact that you, the consumers, don't know what it is and don't know what it means. All right. And I've talked about doing this. I thought about doing this. I realized, wow, that's a big thing to cover. A lot of bells and whistles. And it's also a little intimidating because it's, it's one of those things that a lot of agents have a different opinion on what it entails. Continuing education classes aside, everybody, they all draw their lines a little bit different. So what I've done is I've been researching this for the entire last week. I've used 3 major books, a whole bunch of online stuff, right? I'm going to reference all the books in the show notes below. So consider that my bibliography. And hopefully, because one of the authors of one of these books is actually a viewer of this show, if he comments below on this, I will be amazed, delighted, and sort of mortified. All right? I hope I do him credit. I could not just sit here and read his book chapter and verse all the way through, but I did pull elements of it out. And hopefully I did him well. I did him proud. All right? And like I said, let's get through this so I can start talking at you, because it's going to be a long one. I think it's going to be a long one. All right, let's start with the beginning here. And here are the numbers for November 8th, 2023. Actives this week are 15,565, up 367 from the week before. New listings were 1,979, up 122. Our contracts for last week were 1,742, up 75. Closings last week were 1,015. Coming soon to an MLS near you is 594 new listings. And for our Cromford Report numbers, our supply is 61.1, our demand is 70.2, and our overall Cromford Report number is 115, still putting us in a seller's market, but just by that much. All right, and we'll break it down to our residential areas and our cities and towns. We have in the buyer's market still is Maricopa, Goodyear, Queen Creek, and Buckeye. They're all under 90. Surprise is sitting at 95.3, headed towards that territory. Peoria has broken into the balance market at 109.7. Everything else on the board is still technically in a seller's market. All right, Chandler leading the pack at 167. All right, and our biggest loser this month over month has been Queen Creek, down 29. No gainers, no green, all red. That's a good analogy for life right there. No green, all red. So let's get going on what's next here. So today I'm going to discuss agency. Agency is a topic. I call the contract the heart of the transaction. Agency is the soul of the relationship between the individual real estate agent and the buyer or the seller. All right. It is a legal term. It defines our relationship that we have. There are multiple types of agency. We're going to get into quite a few of them. There's ways to create agency. There's some ways to indirectly create agency. There's ways to just suddenly wake up in the morning, look over at the bed next to you, and you realize you are in an agent relationship with that person. All right. We're going to discuss that kind of thing. This is, in my mind, what is causing our biggest problems with these lawsuits, is that the individual consumer did not know what they got for the value of their money. Right? They did not walk away with the feeling they received a service that was of value to them. And maybe there's some dirtbag attorneys out there, but that's a whole different thing. All right. With that being said, I very rarely do this, but I do want to call this one out on this one, boys and girls. I am not an attorney, and I am not your agent yet. All right. Big red asterisks on this. I'm going to be talking about legal stuff. I'm going to be talking about agency stuff. Do not think you're listening to an attorney when he tells you what these things are. I'm literally just pulled them out of books. All right. And I've gone through many CE classes. Agency takes up 3 hours. Over 24 hours, we need to take it every 2 years. And every 2 years, when I renewed my license, I've had to take another 3 hours of continuing education on this subject. Fortunately, most of my material's already been done for me. I just had to go find the old stuff, regurgitate, and go to my books. Right. Speaking of the books, let's discuss that real quick. All right. I am using three main sources of information, one source of reference, right? I did pull stuff off the internet, and I'll be honest with you, ChatGPT did a really good job of answering questions. It's really bad at answering certain type of questions, but I pulled some of the content off of that, especially some of the definitions. Other definitions I got was from the Financial Real Estate Handbook. That was 5th edition, that was sent out by First American Title Company. These little blue books, you've seen them before. That's where I used to open it up and just give you the definition of the day. I also had monthly payments based on interest rates and amount borrowed, which used to be completely worthless a few years ago because it only went down to 5% on the charts. And it actually goes all the way up to 12%. So we got room to grow on this one. Now the biggest problem is it taps out on a loan amount of $400,000. And, you know, it's not a lot of house on that. So this is part of what I'm using here. Other one that I'm using is K.Michelle Lind, Arizona Real Estate, a Professional Guide to Law and Practice, the 3rd edition on this. She is, for years, she was the attorney, the chief attorney for the Arizona Association of Realtors. Now she has taken over. She's the chief executive officer of the Arizona Association of Realtors, and she literally read the book, or wrote the book. This is one of those books every time I get a new agent in here, I say, go to Amazon, buy one of these things, read it. Read it before you go to bed, cover to cover. It will save your butt one of these days. First year I got licensed, when my in-laws asked me what did I want for Christmas, because they were really big on asking you, all right, I asked them for a copy of this, all right. They thought it was weird, but they knew their son-in-law was weird already. So I'm pulling a lot out of here, and I might even reference a couple of court cases, because for geeks like me who really, really like to know what the case was that came up with that ruling, she's awesome at that. And the final book, and this is the one I mentioned earlier, this is coming from the Competent Broker, okay? This is by Reuben. Let me get that to where you can see all of it, by Reuben Moore, all right? Seeking Competence and Integrity in the Real Estate Business. I did a book review on this about a year or so ago. When I pulled it, I literally wanted to know how he described certain aspects I'm going to be dealing with on this, right? If you are a brand new real estate agent, a broker, somebody who just became a broker, anything along like this, this needs to be nailed to the door of the National Association of Realtors. All right, seriously, all right. And if any of you guys got that reference, God bless you. Nobody gets those things anymore. So let's get started on this, right? These are my reference. I'm going to be grabbing them through the course of this. All right. But let's talk about the topic today, and we're going to be talking about agency. All right. Agency, a lot of people think, oh yeah, you work for an agency or you're an agent, Agency is actually a legal term, all right? And it's a description of a relationship, all right? And what that relationship is it's a relationship in which one person, the agent, is authorized to represent the interests of another, the client, in business dealings with third parties. All right? That little ARE, page 48, that's literally her definition that I stole right out of that, all right? Not going to argue with her, okay? But that's what it is. It's a relationship between two individuals, all right? And one is authorized to represent the other in dealings with third parties, all right? You might say Hollywood agents, same thing. They're representing the interests of another, all right? Real estate agent representing the interests of another. Road agents, if for any of you guys have any kind of history of the Old West, right? Authorized to act on, the interests of another, right? This is not a one-way street. This is actually a two-way street. By giving agency to a third party, they can act in certain ways, right, that you will be responsible for. We're going to be covering that in a bit, right? But let's continue on, all right? So this is the agency side of the house. Right. Now, agency is defined as being a fiduciary relationship, right? All right. A fiduciary relationship is also a legal term, right? And that means much like you are acting, on behalf of somebody else, all right, in that other person's interest. I started doing some research on that and realized I was rabbit holing it. It literally goes back to the Roman Empire, all right, where people would have agents working for them and they would be assigned legally through Roman law, that relationship and those rights and responsibilities around them, right? But we break them down today in something we call fiduciary duty, all right? And this fiduciary duty, all right, is the fiduciary duties are the obligations of those who act on behalf of somebody else's interest. Right? And this is the part that we get hammered on over and over and over and over again. What are the elements of fiduciary duties, right? In real estate, we consider there are 6 elements of a fiduciary duty, right? And we're supposed to remember these things, right? Now, the trick is you come up with one of those little memes in your head, all right? And we use the term old car, all right? So just remember old car, okay? Old car breaks down to these duties: the duty of obedience, the duty of loyalty, the duty of disclosure, the duty of confidentiality, the duty of accountability, and the duty of reasonable care and diligence. You get a lot of mileage on that one little R at the end of this thing, all right? But reasonable care and diligence, right? We're going to break down each and every one of these things. All right? Obedience. This is the one. I was never obedient. Ask any of my previous teachers, right? But obedience means you must obey your client's lawful instructions. Right? When I'm reading off the agency agreement to my clients, I usually say right about here, lawful instructions. I do have a Thelma and Louise get out of the car clause. All right. What I mean by obedience, right? I'm obeying your lawful instructions. I like to use the analogy, we are driving a car and we are going to a destination. We're going to find that destination together. That destination is your new house. Or that destination is you being homeless because you just sold your house. Whatever that destination is, you're driving the car. I'm sitting in the passenger seat, reading the road map, playing with your stereo, all right, reaching back into the cooler and getting you a new drink or something like that. But I'm not driving that car, all right? And it is ride or die, all right? We're going along. Unless you want to do something unlawful. I use the term illegal, unethical, and immoral. Right? Pretty much covers everything. Now, strangely, right, a lot of these things you don't actually see unethical and immoral called out in any of these documents. It's harshly implied in certain places, and we'll cover that too, right? But I use the term, this, and you can steal this if you want. Yeah, I'm along illegal, unethical, and immoral. I will tell you before we get there. All right, and I will start yelling at you before you get there. All right, but when you think we're going to pull a Thelma and Louise off the frickin' cliff, I'm bailing out the door and screaming at you, you're an idiot. All right, because I have an obligation to the other side of the transaction too. We're going to cover a bit on this thing later on. All right, but that obligation to them is not superseded by my obedience to you. Want to use an example? You're selling in a house. You tell me the faucet doesn't work in the kitchen. Everybody I deal with is going to know that the faucet doesn't work in the kitchen, right? I have a requirement to disclose, right, a material fact that will impact a person's consideration that they give for the property, right? Now, some people might say, how does it conflict with confidentiality? That's where it gets fun. We're going to go more on that, right? But that's an example of, point where I can pull out an obedience. Another thing along these things, obeying the client's lawful instructions. Sometimes you're going to say, you're going to want me to do something that I can do, but I still have to notify the other side on. Let's say you're one of those people who come up to me and say, I like both of these houses. Let's write an offer on both of them, get them both accepted, and then I'll choose which one I want. Yeah, we could do that. All right. We're borderline unethical on that. I'd say almost immoral on that, because what you're asking these people to do is take their house off the market until you finish deciding which one of the two you want. And then the other one went, hey, sorry, kid, you're out of luck. Put your house back on the market. You just lost another weekend. All right. Can you do that? Yes. How do you do that in Arizona in a way that I do not agree with? Right? Is you literally just let both sellers know, hey, by the way, we got another house under contract, and if we like that one better, we're going to cancel this contract in our inspection period. You have to disclose that. Now, it bothers me that instead of the community at large, can you tell I'm starting to get pumped up here already? The real estate community at large say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to consider that unethical behavior, and your responsibility as an agent to say, no, we're not doing that. All right. People rationalized a way to pull that off. Hey, as long as you just tell everybody that we're being dirtbags, you get to be a dirtbag. All right. Obedience. Part of it. Personally, I'm probably out the door right about that point if you push it. Especially if you decide to tell me, no, I don't want you to write a letter. Gone. Peace out. All right. Let's talk on the other side, because this is sort of a conflict here, right? Loyalty. You must always act in your client's best interests, even if it means foregoing your own interests. All right. Generally, this boils down to, let's just remember, we get paid at the end of the day, and we don't get paid if a house doesn't transact. If you're sitting there and your client is deciding they don't want to buy that house anymore, even though you need that money to make mortgage or your Lexus payment, all right, and that your client has an out because they discovered something on inspection, all right, your loyalty means that you get them out of that contract by exercising one of the clauses in the contract that gets them out. Yeah, you're out the commission, Sucks to be you, kid. If you wanted a steady paycheck, you should have gone worked a nice little 9-to-5 cubicle dweller's job. All right. That's what the loyalty breaks down to. You must always act in your client's best interest, even if it means foregoing your own interests. However, you don't have to do anything that's going to cost you your license. All right? Remember. But I don't like playing what-if games. What if butterflies had machine guns? Then birds wouldn't mess with them. All right? In these classes, there's always that one guy right now. Well, what about this? Hey, just don't be stupid, all right? This is how it works out. You got to be loyal to your clients, all right? And you're acting in their best interest, right? This does not mean later on as you deal with clients and you start realizing acting in your client's best interest does not mean if they call you up at 7 o'clock on a Saturday saying, I need you to drive 15 miles across town and show me this house right now. Okay, you can draw your own lines on this, right? So, but very, very seriously, when it comes down to the transaction, to the actual physical mechanics of going with that contract, loyalty means client's best interest. And if they want to do that walkthrough at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, all right, you're doing the walkthrough at 5 o'clock on the Friday night. You're not necessarily telling them, hey, I can't make that. Can we do it Saturday morning? All right. There is a difference between what I just said on those two things, and it's just one of those, let them know. I mean, honestly, just let them know. Hey, is there any way we can do it Saturday? I got my kid's soccer game that night. All right. So loyalty. It's number 2 of the old car phrase. Disclosure. You must disclose any material facts about the transaction, including your relationship to the other party. You will see a lot. Agent is relative of client. That's usually where the mom and dad are using their kids to sell their house. The kids are, mom and dad are the agent helping the kids buy a house. Other things about material facts. Remember I was talking about the letter where you're sending across and saying, hey, need to let you know we got these 2 different things. All right. This is also considered part of the disclosure. But, once again, we have certain obligations to the other side. Disclosure on your principal side is if you come up with something about the property, you see something about the property you're uncomfortable with. All right. Let's say you're locking up. All right. You're locking up the house. Your clients already head off to the next house, and the neighbor comes over and says, so you're going to get the meth lab house sold? Stop. Tell me more about the meth lab house, sir. And then they're going to the neighbor will tell you all about how there used to be a meth lab there. All right, great. And then you're going to instantly, when you get to the next house, talking to say, hey, the neighbor came up and said there used to be a meth lab on that. Let's see if there actually was. And you go check the county meth lab thing. But you don't sit there and don't tell them about that potential meth lab next door. All right, or on the property. Right, you have to disclose that. All right. So that's a material fact that's going to affect. And it's really weird. And this is where we get in trouble on dual agency over here later on today. All right, is when you're discussing disclosure, things that agents don't think they need to disclose to either side, including their own client. All right. So disclosure. Basically, I always tell my people, if I know it, you know it. Seriously, if I know it, you know it. In case you haven't noticed, I never stop talking, so the odds are I'm going to have covered everything past that. All right? But that's the next part, though, disclosure. Now we go to confidentiality. All right? You must keep your clients' information confidential unless you have their permission to do otherwise. And that permission should be written. Your broker will say it needs to be written. Your board will say it needs to be written. It needs to be written. Get that written down if you get permission to disclose. All right. Otherwise, it's confidential, information. What's an example of confidential information? If I am on the seller's side, and by being on the seller's side, the seller has told me I need to sell this property before the end of the year. Otherwise, I will have to pay capital gains on the proceeds of the sale of this property. That is something that the other side could use to lowball us. Right? So we don't disclose that. We keep that confidential. What is the reason for them moving? I don't get to tell them that the reason why you're selling that house is so you can move to California and get treatment for your testicular cancer. I can say they intend to move. They intend to move out of state. They don't need to know about your testicular cancer or how you caught it, if you can catch it. Anyways, all right, confidentiality. And there's a tension, okay, between the disclosure you have to give to the other side and the confidentiality on the other side. If you come up with anything on those lines and you're not sure, hey, I want to maintain my client's confidentiality, but I'm concerned that I have to disclose this, take a good look at that. I can't come up with a good example off the top of my head, but you need to keep your client's information confidential unless they give you permission. Yeah, go ahead and tell them about my testicular cancer. Maybe they'll feel sorry for me and cut me a break or something like that. All right? Next one here is accounting, and I've actually heard two different answers for this, so I actually went with the book answer. That means you must keep accurate records of all money and property involved in the transaction. A lot of times when people screw up on this is the department wants you to keep your records. They will occasionally audit your broker to make sure you keep your records. But you also see a lot of stuff where your clients will occasionally call you up and ask you for a document that they got a copy of, but they lost for whatever reason. Hey, do you still have a copy of this? Especially right about tax season and stuff like that, because in certain cases you can write off your costs of selling a house on your taxes. At least you used to be able to. The way they change the tax laws every once in a while. Hey, remember the asterisks? I'm also not a tax advisor, right? But you need to keep accurate records of that. You need to be able to produce those, right, to help them out. And you don't want stuff come, money. Let's say this is one of those things you don't do, but I've heard of people doing it. Down payments released to the seller before closing. The stuff we saw back 2 years ago. I can't believe their brokerage is allowed them to get away with that. I sure as hell wouldn't. I know if I bounced that one off of Steve, he'd say no. Right. And I'm not even sure if that one was legal, but they were talking about it. That was apparently the winning bid on a property. She probably should have kept an eye on that property to see how fast it came back on the market, right? But, right, what happens if we do that? Next thing you know, you don't have a receipt, right? So, according to this definition with accounting, you got to keep accurate records of all money and all property involved in the transaction. Also helps right there. If they're selling the property, make sure they're selling all the property. All right. Title's going to look into that, but there's a reason why we read our title reports as real estate agents. Suddenly realize they missed the second parcel because everything in there was, you just literally pulled the legal agreement or the legal off of taxes. All right. Didn't realize that there's a second parcel on there. All right, I'm sort of stretching on the accounting one. The other one that I've heard about it with accounting, and I've heard both answers in the same or in different C classes, is that you're accountable to your client. All right, but book answer right now is that you must keep accurate records of all money and property involved in the transaction. Reasonable care. This is the one that gets, I got to say, this one probably gets more agents in trouble than anything else that we've covered on this, right? Except maybe disclosure. Reasonable care. You must use reasonable care and skill when handling your client's business. Agents get in trouble all the time working outside their scope. They get a buyer, start looking for a buyer. All of a sudden the buyer wants to go and cross county lines or go into a neighborhood that they haven't been in before. They've never worked that area. They don't know any of the unique features out there. And they get over their skis. And because of that, their client gets damaged. Because the client buys the house, just to use an example for the Southeast Valley. In Fissure Land, where the earth opens up and eat houses, and kids and cars and, that kind of stuff. And that agent, not being experienced in that neck of the woods, didn't even think to check the fissure map. All right? There's actually a map out there. You can get it online, and that map out there just shows you the area where the known fissures are. All right? And no, for you guys out of state, it's not earthquakes. It's just because they took all the water out of the land and the land's collapsing. All right? But you need to know about that. You need to know where those areas are. If you are working in an area, say, I would say down south near the river, not only is there a flood zone like crazy down there, right? But since there was also a lot of industrial down there, you got a couple Superfund sites floating around out there. Reasonable care. If you think you can do residential, you can't do commercial. Technically, you can put your name on a piece of paper and you can write this, that, and the other thing, but do you really know how to transact a gas station? Sounds like fun. I'll write the contract. Hey, you're going to pay me $50,000 for a gas station. I'm going to sell you $50,000 worth of gas station. Or in this case, if you're representing the buyer, sounds great. Let's do it. And you never check to see the condition of the gas tanks. Now you got a problem, right? You didn't know that because you're outside of your scope, all right? And you were not using reasonable care and skill when handling your client's business. So this really gets a lot of agents in trouble. And when you don't know, your fiduciary duty is to say, I do not know. And your next thing should say, let me go find out from somebody who's smarter than me. All right, let me go talk to my broker on that. All right, one of my agents, his first transaction, I didn't even know he was working this thing. He just pops in. He's like, I got my first contract. I'm like, really? What'd you get? I knew you were working with a buyer. Oh, he decided to buy 25 acres. 25 acres of what? Desert? Yeah, he's buying 25 acres out in the desert. And I'm like, whoa, stop. All right. Homeboy did not know what the hell he didn't know. Does it have water? Is there any previous buildings that used to be on that 25 acres? Is there any current buildings on that 25 acres? Or is it bare land? Where are the washes? Hell, does it have javelina? Does it have any, turtles? Yeah, sir. Desert tortoise. Do not buy land with desert tortoise on that. They can come on a hard stop on you. Endangered animals, that kind of stuff. You don't know these things because you're just a new kid. And as far as I was concerned, you were just going out and looking at houses that day and calling me up after every one like you were supposed to. And you went dark, and next thing you know, you're in a contract with land. Yeah, read him the right act on that one. So, reasonable care. Keep inside your scope and knowing what's going on. Now, that covers, what we talk about in Old Car. We've covered obedience. We covered loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable due care and diligence. All right. It's not an excuse. Oh, I forgot is not an excuse. All right. But other aspects of agency. All right. Agency is created by consent. Consent is always good, boys and girls. All right. However, it can be implied, and implied gets a lot of people in a lot of trouble. All right. Examples of implied consent, or implied consent. Kids, don't listen to me. Implied agency is when a buyer walks into an open house and starts talking with the person they see in front of them, and that person that they're seeing in front of them starts talking about, oh, I can help you out, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this, well, tell me more about this place. And next thing you know, that individual thinks, because of the actions of the agent, oh, this agent's working for me. No, right? But implied consent is real. I actually helped a lady once who was in a classic implied consent relationship with the buyer's agent. And she honestly thought that guy was working for both of them. Never was. Right? He was fully working for the buyer at that point, and he was telling her things. Oh yeah, I will take care of that. I will make sure that happens. I will write that document up. I will get that information to you. All right. He's going right down the list of all the duties that he's doing, this and that for her, but never said he was her real estate agent. Never said that, that's where that agency went, but she thought, all right. And okay. So National Association of Realtors and a whole bunch of other ethical boards says I'm not supposed to get involved in anybody else's transaction. All right. I simply confirmed the fact that she did not have an agency relationship with that agent. And then I became her agent. So, and eventually got the listing. So, anyways, let's take a look at this one. It can be applied. It can be created by consent. And there's one other that I should have put down on here, because it covers my favorite word in real estate. All right. Agency by estoppel. All right. Agency by estoppel is when a person acts like the other person's agent with their understanding that that person is acting like that and doesn't correct them. That's the point. Does not correct them. Knows about it, doesn't correct them. Then you can have agency by estoppel. I just love that word. All right, let's continue on. Here in Arizona, all right, to create agency. Now, if you notice, I started this really late in the day, and here comes the sun. So it's just, you guys are going to have to deal with the glare off my Dawson forehead. The agency is covered, monumentalized, however you want to put it, right? We actually have declared agency with a particular document, right? All the old timers called it the REITy, okay? I'm not a big fan of calling it the REITy because I think that sounds silly. All right, I just call it the agency disclosure form. All right, this is the real estate agency and disclosure and election form. This one is going to disclose what agency responsibilities are, and then the buyer or seller then checks a box electing which kind of relationship they want. All right. Now, let me see if I can blow this up here real quick. All right. So, typical doc. All right. Before a seller landlord, hereinafter referred to as seller, or buyer or tenant, hereinafter referred to as buyer, enters a discussion with a real estate broker, licensee affiliated with a broker, the buyer and seller should understand what type of agency relationship or representation they will have with the broker in the transaction. Now, lines 4 and 5, this is where it gets fun. Enters a discussion with a real estate broker. Right. There are people out there who said that every time somebody walks into your open house, if they ask you anything, you should have them sign one of these things or give them a copy saying, I have a relationship with somebody else. All right. I'm sure the E&O insurance companies love that. All right. All right. But, and there's also people who say, if I'm sitting next to you at a dinner party, okay, and you ask me, what would I need to do to sell my house? And I look at their house and I start offering suggestions. I'm supposed to be sliding an agency form over to them and having them sign it real quick, right? But it breaks down what the buyer broker does, all right, and the seller's broker. It also covers limited representation, right? But A and B on both these, buyer brokers is a fiduciary duties, and then it calls out old car, all right, and states other potential buyers represented by the broker may consider, make offer on, or acquire an interest in the same or similar properties as buyer is seeking. All right. And then same thing in the seller broker, except in this case, it's saying that the sellers, all right, represented by the broker, other sellers may use the same broker to list their properties. All right. So, but it's clearly calling out the fiduciary duty. Next bit, and I actually zoom this one up a bit more. So let's go to this. Oh boy, did I just screw that whole thing up, didn't I? So for the person who suggested I do just zoom in and stuff in the middle of the podcast, this is exactly why I don't do that. All right, so broker represents the transaction. All right, hold on, I gotta get that down. Going to manual. All right, regardless of who the broker represents in the transaction, the broker shall exercise reasonable skill and care in the performance of the broker's duties, and shall be truthful and honest to both the buyer and seller, and shall disclose all known facts when materially and adversely affect the consideration to be paid by any party. Remember everything I was talking about back there? Things I would have to disclose on the other side? This explains the requirements. And then it goes into my favorite ARS 32-2156. This is a stigmatized property phrase that we have talked about a billion times. All right. Then in bold, down at the bottom, the duties of the broker in a real estate transaction do not relieve the seller or the buyer from the responsibility to protect their own interests. The seller and the buyer should carefully read all agreements to ensure that the documents adequately express their understanding of the transaction. Sound pretty decent? All right. So we have on this thing, as we described, two separate types: buyer, tenant, or seller. Both people can sign the same one. All right, that's pretty cool that way. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. The fact that I screwed up my formatting. All right, both of them are signed, but there is a third section on that, and that's called the dual agency side. And for you guys who listen to a certain podcast where every time they mention a certain ex-president's name, they do the Uruk-hai sound from Lord of the Rings in the background, just picture that just happened when I brought up the term dual agency or limited representation. Dun, dun, dun. All right. First things first, allow me to pontificate on this. I do not like dual agency. I do not think dual agency is a good thing, and I think it should be illegal in the state of Arizona to have dual agency. I think limited representation strikes to the core of what we actually do as real estate agents and justifies our existence. All right. So when you sit there and decide you can split the difference, you're going to have a bad day. That being said, I have done dual agency. I have done it in situations where I've had two independent parties who knew each other, who were friends, come up to me and say, Ray, I want to sell a house to this person here, but I need to short sale it, and the bank will let me do it because they want to see it on the market first. In that case, I took the listing. We marketed it for the minimum amount of time that the bank wanted it on the market. We received no competing offers. We submitted the short sale with that original one, and I walked him right through the whole process, and I explained to him clearly the things I could and could not do. Right? And somebody got to buy a house from the friend that they wanted, and everybody went away happy. All right. That is like the only condition I do dual agency anymore. If I am sitting on an open house and it's my listing and somebody comes through the door and they do not have an agent, I will tell them straight up, hey, just so you know, I do not do dual agency. If you get at any point in the process, you go, I want to buy this house. You look me in the eye and say, I want to buy this house. And then you say nothing else. I will call somebody and have you talk to them, and they will represent you in the transaction. But I don't need to know how much you love the house, how much you're willing to pay for that house, because I am on the other side. Make sense? But dual agency does exist in the state of Arizona. Right? You are allowed to do dual agency here at ProStar Realty because it's Steve's brokerage and he makes the calls on these things. Right? If this is ever my brokerage or I ever have my own brokerage, this one's going away, boys and girls. If you want to do dual agency, you will not be working for me. Editorial aside, let's get on to what this horrible, terrible thing is that Ray's all worked up about. All right? Dual agency is first introduced on that Reedy form that we saw earlier. Right, so let's take a look at that and I'll show you what it says. It's your third option. All right. Broker representing both seller and buyer, limited representation. A broker either acting directly or through one or more licensees within the same brokerage firm can legally represent both the seller and buyer in a transaction, but only with the knowledge and informed consent of both the seller and the buyer. In these situations, the broker, acting through its licensees, represents both the buyer and the seller with limitations of the duties owed to the buyer and the seller. A, the broker will not, without written authorization, disclose to the other party that the seller will accept a price or terms other than stated on the listing, or that the buyer will accept a price or terms other than offered. And there will be, they should have been capitalized, be conflicts in the duties of loyalty, obedience, disclosure, and confidentiality. Disclosure of confidential information may be only made with written authorization. That's the first time you see this as a client. All right, you're going to be signing this at the. You're seeing this before a contract has been written up. All right, if you're on the listing side, all right, you're going to be doing this the same time you're doing the listing agreement. All right, if you're on the buyer side, you're signing this thing at the first house you see. And we're going to have this conversation. All right, and I'm going to be straight up. If I find a ProStar house that you like and you want to put an offer in on it, because I know about it. All right, you're going to be signing one of these things, and you're going to have limited representation with ProStar Realty, the brokerage. All right. Now, this is where it gets fun. Okay. There is a legal argument to be made, and I can't remember the term that it means, is that if one agent in a brokerage knows something, the law considers that every agent in that brokerage knows exactly the same thing. All right. And since we as licensees are all working through our broker, okay, we're just opening up doors and, that kind of stuff. We have a fiduciary duty to other agents' clients under ProStar Realty. All right. I think the courts are pretty solid. In any case where these things have come up, they've always come down on the plaintiff saying, yes, your brokerage did have. There is, let's see if I did this page. Hold on. God, what is... Reuben, help me out here. What's it called? He had... Oh. There's only 3 pages on this whole thing, and damn if I can find it right off the bat. Designated agency. All right. And he's actually paraphrasing an article that came in Realtor magazine called Dual Agency Doesn't Benefit Consumers. And he's referencing this, and nice little footnotes at the bottom, by the way. All right. But he's I'm referring to one broker representing both the buyer and seller in single transaction. In some states, dual agency can also mean 2 brokers working for the same firm, each representing one of the parties, often referred to as designated agency. Arizona does not respect designated agency. All right. Designated agency of, hey, you got this person, and fight, does not work. It hasn't been upheld in the Arizona court law. So a lot of agents out there think it does. All right. So when we hit one of these situations and you want to buy a ProStar house with Ray, the ProStar agent, we're going to dual agency. All right. I've never had to do that. So, but we'll see what happens. And having had talks with Steve over the last week, we might be changing up that rule too. But what does dual agency do to you, the consumer? All right. Well, first things first is you're signing a completely different form. We just brought it to your attention in the first form in the reading. Now we're actually getting into the consent to the limited representation. This is consent. Remember, affirmative, enthusiastic consent, boys and girls. All right. And I'm going to break this one down for you. All right. Because first part of this, just to let you know, first part of this, buyer, seller, subject property, firm name, the licensees involved. That's all the boilerplate up here. All right. It's stuff down at the bottom, the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. All right. This calls out a lot of the same things you've already seen. All right. Broker now represents both the buyers and sellers, and both parties understand that neither broker nor broker's licensee can represent the interests of one party to the exclusion or detriment of the other party. The parties understand and further consent to the following. All right. And then it breaks it all down. All right. And it calls out there, number 2, there are going to be conflicts in the duties of loyalty, obedience, disclosure, and confidentiality. There will. I think that will should be capitalized and bold and underlined with big flashing lights going on next to it. All right. I'm amazed as often they bold things in this contract. They don't bold that word will. There will be conflicts. All right. Disclosure of confidential information may only be made with written authorization. This does not relieve each licensee of any legal obligation to disclose all known facts which materially and adversely affect the consideration to be paid by any party to the transaction. All right. There's a stigmatized property thing again. All right. Licensees still have to exercise reasonable skill and care in the performance of their duties, and they're obligated at all times to deal honestly with all parties. All right. And the duties of the licensee in this transaction do not relieve the buyer or the seller from the responsibility to protect their own interests. All right. I don't think this says enough. Ray's humble opinion. I don't think that this actually says enough on these things. I wish they would go into greater detail. All right. Covers that compensation is to the broker will be paid pursuant to a separate agreement. The prior agreements, understand the consent does not replace prior agreements entered to with the broker, and such agreements shall remain in effect. However, to the extent that the terms of the consent contradict or conflict with the terms of prior agreements, this consent will supersede. So, if you signed that first document with me, and you said, I'm your buyer's agent, and then we go into a dual agency, and you sign this thing saying, oh, it's okay. That first, you can't go back. Well, I signed the first one that said I didn't want to. This one's going to supersede this. If this closing doesn't happen, the first one goes back into effect. Make sense? All right. And terminate. If the buyer and seller do not enter a contract relating to the subject property, or if the transaction between the seller and buyer fails to close, parties agree that this consent is terminated, and the parties shall have no further rights or obligations pursuant to this consent. All right. Very clearly calling this one out. It dies with the contract. All right. And another indemnification clause. It's not Ray's fault. All right. And then we undersigned it, acknowledge it, this, that, and the other thing. This is all you sign. All right. To do a dual agency. All right. A couple things on this. All right. Not that one. This one. You cannot, and this is what you lose as a consumer when you are having your agent do dual agency, buyer and seller both sides. They may not disclose any confidential information that benefits one side over the other. They gotta get out of here, so they're for their tax reasons. All right, and they may not negotiate or advocate. That one's actually pretty huge. All right, that's half of what we do. That's the meat and potatoes. Okay, we help you negotiate. We help you advocate. All right, let's go to the books here. I got a really great example here. Where did I find it? Nice about this book, sometimes they have the frequently asked question. All right. Here's one. The seller is insisted on listing the property at a list price that is above the listing broker's comparable price opinion because the seller believes the property is worth the price. Should the listing broker provide the buyer with information that is public knowledge or as a matter of public record, such as comparables, when that information is detrimental to the seller's interest? All right. Answer to that was a probably not. So okay. May a dual agent point out to a buyer a negative characteristic of the property? All right. And the answer was, a dual agent may point out a negative characteristic of the property only if that negative characteristic is a material fact that must be disclosed by law. By law, okay? Comments such as, these large windows are impressive, but they may increase your utility bill, should be avoided. All right? So any of my clients out there who are listening to this know that part of what I consider my job is to be the voice of reason. When we come into these houses and you are squealing about the kitchen, I'm going to point out the fact that there's no toilet in the bathroom and they jackhammered up the slab and then didn't replace it. Okay. It's a material fact to disclose that is not in there and stuff like that. But, I'm constantly trying to point out little things. Hey, this window is single pane and this is going to get really hot. It's going to be your electricity bills are going to be really, really high. That roof, looks solid, but it also looks old, right? You might have an issue with that. See these cracks? That could be a sign of a bigger problem. Any of these things really need to be disclosed? I just said it was an old roof. Have to disclose the age of a roof. You know, if I know it, you know it. Okay. But making that opinion, that might need to be replaced. Okay. I can't say that anymore. And that's sort of why you're bringing me into the picture, right? So that's the one that really drives me nuts. All right. The whole fact that, you are, I use the term on this thing, you're working for the transaction. You're not working for your clients. Right? The entire purpose of why we're here is to work for our clients. Hopefully make money, pay our own mortgages, that kind of stuff, right? But the reason, hey, you don't need a real estate agent to go buy a house. You can drive down to a builder right now, drive in there and say, I want to buy a house. And they will sell you a house. Right? You could knock on every door on your street. You could drive around, just look for that for sale by owner. You can go online and find houses that have been listed online by for sale by owner. You can knock on the door, make communication with that guy. How much you want? I want this much. How about if I give you this? Sounds great. Okay, sign here. Boom. Right? You can do all that. Right? But it's not just the convenience of us giving you access to the listings that you pay real estate agents for. All right? It's for our experience and knowledge to make sure you're buying a good house. You're finding the house that you want. Or, my personal favorite, you're meeting your needs in ways that you might not envision being the way to meet your need. And I'm not telling you what that one is because that's a Ray secret. Right? But you can go forever looking for that widget when you really need was a fillbore. Right? I know where those are and what they do and where to get one. That kind of stuff. Having the the contacts, all right, to go, okay, now we need to go get a home inspection. Okay. I have home inspectors. I have ones that I've vetted. You can open up the phone book and grab a home inspection. You don't know how good they are. Right? That comes from experience. Right? How much can that save you in a transaction? Seriously. All right? I've seen some home inspections that weren't worth the piece of paper they got printed up on, and I'm not sure how that guy stays in business. I have a theory about how he stays in business. All right? But when you sit there and you start looking at the, losing a good chunk of that, all right? That's an argument that I can't answer. Hey, is it in my seller's best interest if to refer Johnny the Hatchet, the guy who does home inspections and will find every little freaking thing wrong with the property and uses a software package that makes it look like the house is condemned, and if I'm really doing on the seller side best interest, if I refer that guy, if I'm doing dual agency. I mean, I'm just spitballing at this point, but I really can't, emphasize as much as how much I hate this shit. I really do. All right. There are 9 states in the country that this is illegal in. Arizona should be 11th or the 10th. I do know that people are actually starting, what's the next big lawsuit? And those attorneys are starting to look at dual agency. They're starting to look at those dual agency transactions. Whose side were you working on? Did you really disclose everything? All right. Did you know? Okay. And it's the same thing. Agents out there are thinking, well, I mean, they signed the piece of paper. That protects me. I got my magic piece of paper here. All right. You, consumer, explain to me what that means. All right. You now know. Okay. You know what old car is. You actually know what all these things are because I've explained it to them. But your average consumer has not listened to a Ray Dawson, podcast breaking down agency. All right. So, yeah, I think that's the next one coming down the pike. And once again, I told y'all many, many years ago when I got my license, I said, hey guys, this is going to be a problem. And it's like, oh, shut up, kid. We're all making money over here. So, at the end of the day, when does agency go away? Do I still have relationship with these hundreds of people out there, in each individual case? And am I still their agent? Well, if we closed, no, I'm not yours anymore. I'm free as the wind, right? These are the areas that will actually close up, all right? Agency terminates after closing, all right? We're closed, we're done. Okay, bye. It was great. You'll always mean something to me. All right. It will also close by mutual consent. I just don't think this is working out between us. I think so too. Okay, bye. We'll always have Paris. Revocation. This is where the client fires the agent. You're gone. I don't like you anymore. Go. All right. Renunciation. Renunciation is where the agent renounces their agency status with the principal, the client. Apparently involves 5 candles spinning around in circles and under a dark moon and saying, I renounce you, I renounce you, I renounce you. And then you have renounced your agency agreement with them. All right. That's the other way you can break up an agency agreement. Now, that being said, do not think you can suddenly renounce your agency agreement with somebody when you just screwed up. Nah, there's a timeline there. All right. And death of one of the principals, either the agent or, the buyer seller. Now, there are a couple other things on here, a couple weird ones, like if the brokerage goes into default or bankruptcy, that can trigger. Now, these kind of things. All right. But one thing that stands above all else in these things, all right, is confidentiality remains till everybody dies. So the confidentiality remains until the death of the agent. Not even the death of the principal. All right, seriously. All right, you knew something about the client and then they die. You don't get to tell everybody that at the funeral. Right? The state could come after you on that. Right? You died, then you can talk about it. How does that sound? Get out the Ouija board, boys and girls. All right, but those are the aspects of when the agency is actually terminated. So I have been talking for almost an hour here, and I could probably keep on going on. Sorry, I spun out in a couple places on this, but I really hope that you guys understand that this is what agency does. This is what we talk about when you are hiring a real estate agent. And I think that's part of the problem is that we went to realtor or realtor or realtor. I like realtor, or however they want you to pronounce it. Circle R at the end. When we went to that, we lost the connection with the concept of what an agent is. All right. If you ever wonder about agency, all right, you should picture it as the relationship you would have with your attorney. And if your dog wandered next door and bit a kid, and the attorney came over and said, I've just been hired by the family of the kid. Your dog just bit them. But don't worry. I can represent you in court too. I'll just represent you both at the same time. Nobody would fall for that. All right? No, you want your attorney. All right? And when we got away from that term agent, okay, we got to, we added that brand new freaking word that was supposed to be about brand name and mean that we were set to a higher standard than normal sales agents. All right. I think we really should have doubled down on agent, all right, and agency. And this is what we do for you. All right. It's not pretty kitchens. It's not, marketing and branding solutions like that. It's this basic responsibility. So, responsibility sucks, but it's also fun. All right. So, because responsibility means that when you're at the party, you're sitting there, everybody else is having a good time drinking, but you're the designated sheepdog, so you're watching your little Celtica friends get all sloppy, and you're watching the kids and dogs next to the pool over there. All right, when you're driving them home when they're drunk, you're not driving through any flooded areas. All right, and of course, you're working your circles constantly. All right, thank you guys very much for watching, and if you see this part, thanks for putting up for me. Reuben, I'd love to see some comments in the show notes below on this, or if I really screw it up, you can email it to me. I think you still have it. Thank you much, guys. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you all later.